Today on the show, we are going to be talking about enhancing cultural competence in sports. And I brought what I would deem quite the expert, who is my friend, my colleague, my business mastermind group buddy, all of the things, sports dietitian, Brianna Butler. And I would like to take a minute to say how I met Bree, and then I'm going to let her introduce herself. So Bree's husband was a Dallas Cowboy when I was the dietitian. And one day he was sitting at lunch and he yells at me from across the room and says, "Hey, Aim, my wife kind of wants to be like you. Can you help her do that?" And I was like, "Well, sure. Why don't you connect me?" And here we are, like, I don't know, 10, I think it was 11 years later. And Bree and I coach each other. We help each other. We mentor each other. Like, it's just been a great ride. And so I am super excited now to get to do work with her. Like, we've done quite a few things in this space. I'm talking about cultural competence in sports nutrition and across the board. And we know that it can apply to all different facets of sports, from coaching to athlete training. And so we hope to kind of take that, expand what we talk about in sports nutrition to a variety of everyone's areas. But Bree, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell everyone about your businesses and all the things.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I can't believe that much time has passed,
Yeah.
honestly, with our friendship. It's been a blessing for sure. And so, myself, I am a former professional athlete. I played basketball, WBA, and overseas. And after that, I decided to dive into nutrition. And I co own a company called Stephanie Bree Wellness with my sister, Stephanie, who is also a former professional basketball player. And through Seven Bree Wellness, we work with athletes. We also work with active women of color. And then we also work with a wide variety of clients to our wellness side. So we've got a few different things going on, but our specialties are athletes and women of color. And so I'm really excited to share insight on this cultural competency thing, because I do believe that it's so important. And it's one of those things where you never know who you're going to come across, who you're going to have to serve, especially in sports. So it's an exciting topic, and I'm excited to share a little bit more.
Love it. And one of the things that I always tell people in any areas, we're all a product of our experiences. And so if you lived one experience and maybe you weren't exposed to different cultures or different ethnicities or different foods or whatever that is, you're a product of that. And I think it's on us as individuals, as professionals, especially, to take the step and do our due diligence to learn and to learn about others so that we can be communicate appropriately, can have care appropriately, especially for those of us who might be working in sports. And then for parents, communicating with teammates, family members. I mean, there's just so many different avenues I feel like that this addresses. So let's start by just talking about, like, what is culture and why is it so important when you are caring for an athlete? And then what does the science miss? That we always focus on science, but what does it miss when we're talking about truly caring for an athlete that could be of a different culture than yours?
Yeah, you know what? I feel like when you think about culture, it's really one of those things that makes your athlete unique, right? It's something that makes them different than all the others.
Mhm.
And it's something that they embrace, right? They embrace their culture, they embrace who they are, they embrace where they've come from, they embrace their history. And so much of that is probably what makes them who they are
Yeah.
today. So you mentioned like those lived experiences. When you come from a particular culture, there's going to be experiences that you may have had in that particular culture that maybe someone else did not. So when I think about culture, I think about that uniqueness. I think about that unique journey. I think about that history. I think about what makes that individual different from everyone else.
Yep.
And we know even within the culture or a culture in and of itself, there's still going to be variations. And I feel like the
Oh, yes.
nuances that come with that is what the science misses, right? Like those different traditions, or how one person may eat their chicken versus how someone else may eat their chicken,
Oh,
right? Like
girl.
there are so many different little things that
Yeah.
make a difference. And the science can't always capture that, right? When we look at
No.
sports science, we're thinking about like, energy expenditures and sweat rates and different things like that, that even that might not always break it down based off of culture, right? Like we might not even see that. But when you dive a little bit deeper into an athlete and what makes them go, how they feel they can connect with the people around them, science doesn't always catch that. So it's our responsibility as sports practitioners and experts to really dive into that with our athletes. So that way we make sure we're capturing it.
I know for myself, a lot of that started with asking questions. As you talk, I'm like envisioning every single sport and sporting experience that I have walked into that I was like, oh, one of the best was the first really professional team that I worked with was the Texas Rangers. And in Major
Mhm.
League Baseball, you have a variety of cultures and ethnicities, oftentimes guys that have played in South America, from the Dominican Republic, a lot of different. And I mean, you want to know about like, how do you eat your chicken? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Like I brought in one of the players' moms to teach my chef how to make the rice right, because I was like, you
Yes.
apparently are not doing this right. So we got to figure it out. But it was such a thing. And I just had to ask questions like, well, how do you do it like that? Well, okay, what makes it unique from like this? And that was just such an interesting experience to me, because those were really cultures that I wasn't exposed to, especially growing
Mhm.
up. Athletes that were Latin that primarily spoke Spanish for
Yeah.
a language. And it was very interesting to interact, to communicate, to think about how they eat food, because we would put out what looked like a great sports nutrition meal. And they're like, peace out. Like, that's not what we
Yeah.
eat where I come from. What are you doing? And then, what's interesting, if I would have served similar meals at the Dallas Cowboys, that would have never have worked, because those
Exactly.
were different cultures. And I think that that is so huge. So, as any type of practitioner that's working with athletes, and we really want to support our athletes, I think people listening, strength coaches, athletic trainers. I mean, you
Mhm.
don't love your athlete. I mean, you don't like, you have to love your athletes to do your job, because they have such demanding jobs. So when we talk about like starting to support our athletes that are particularly maybe of a different culture, a different ethnicity, something that's different to us or how you grew up, like where should we start?
Yeah, you know what? You actually mentioned it. It's asking the questions,
Mhm.
not being afraid to ask them questions
Yeah.
about who they are, where they've come from,
Mhm.
what they're comfortable with, what they like. And
Yeah.
sometimes this has to do with getting buy in and really creating that connection with
Yeah.
your athlete, because it can be difficult when you are of a different culture to get that athlete to open up at first, right? But the
Yes.
more you create that rapport and that connection, then you're able to start asking more questions that give you
Mhm.
insight into who they are, what their background is like. If
Yeah.
you have, for example, I'll just take an athlete that maybe grew up in food insecurity, right?
Yeah.
And we say, hey, I'm in the weight room and I'm just chopping it up with this athlete. We finally made connection. We finally had that rapport, and say, hey, you know what? Tell me a little bit about, where you come from. Like, what type of meals did y'all used to
Yeah.
eat? What was that like? Just to get that insight, and obviously keeping it light, because you don't want to put too much pressure on them, or have them feel that you're prying into who they
Right. Right.
are, but just simply giving them an opportunity to share with you a
Yep.
little bit more about them. And they love that. Athletes love that. They love
Yep.
rapport, they love having a relationship. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, I literally had moms of the Texas Rangers sending food to the clubhouse. And I was like, we're doing something
Yes.
wrong here. How? So I had to start asking questions, and I was like, fine, let's bring one of your mamas in here and teach how to do it. So yeah, you're totally right about that in regards to just asking those questions to learn. And I think that that leads us into a kind of something that you and I wanted to talk about when we're working one-on-one with athletes. Could be sports dietitian working with athlete, athletic trainer working with athlete, strength coach working with athlete. How do we communicate? You just alluded to it, I think, where we're asking questions and inquisitive to learn without offending.
Yeah, and you know what? I feel like so much of that comes in conversation and how you preface the conversation,
Yeah.
right? So it can be hard to capture it in just like a form, right?
Yeah,
Or
sure.
when you
Yeah.
sit in a sheet or a Google form and you're asking
Yeah.
questions,
Yeah.
they might leave those questions blank. They might not
Yeah.
even answer them, right? But
Mhm.
if you are in a setting where you recognize, okay, my athlete has let the guard down a little bit and I can feel that they feel comfortable with me and they trust me, then
Mhm.
that's a really good time to ask them questions. And
Mhm.
again, preface it. It's okay if you want to say, hey, you know what? I'm not trying to pry. I really just want to learn more
Yeah.
about you.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to judge you or anything like that. I really just want to know more, because I feel like we've created that connection, and I
Yeah.
love to know more about my athletes, right? So that way they don't feel singled out. They don't feel like you're putting any pressure on them. They don't feel like you're
Mhm.
prying or you're judging them, but you're really opening up the conversation. Open ended questions are always the
Yes.
best, right? Because you allow them to talk to you and it's a
Right.
talk back and forth, it's a conversation versus you talking at them and saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing this and you should be doing that.
Right.
And so I think those are really good ways to kind of kickstart that conversation so your athlete feels like it's a safe space.
Totally. And I know like in our space, so we know food is so centric to culture and honestly to family tradition, to cultural tradition, so many different things. And I mean, I've learned, I just literally my brain, I'm like, can see all these scenarios that I've been in my career that I've been like, I didn't really realize that that maybe was that type, like I really remember having some Brazilian college athletes at TCU. Well, they eat like, I mean, a common thing is to eat like a ham sandwich in the morning, not oatmeal with peanut butter like I eat. You know
Yes,
what I mean? They're like, I'm sorry,
exactly.
what? What are you talking about? We're like, I mean, I would get so many international athletes at TCU and they would be like, what is this stuff y'all call peanut butter? And, in the United States, I mean, peanut butter is like water on a training table. I mean,
Yes,
we have it
exactly.
everywhere. So it's just interesting to think about that. So obviously from our space, but in like especially in the middle school sports, high school sports, club sports, a
Mhm.
lot of times there's not a sports dietitian. There might be
Right.
athletic trainers, directors of operations, coaches, parents,
Mhm.
planning meals, planning things for that. So, how do you advise those, the all of us really when we're having these conversations about food and you might be totally unfamiliar
Yeah.
with the food itself, how it should be cooked? Because I've learned
Mhm.
that's a huge piece of the equation.
Yes.
How do you recommend people working with that and trying to plan around that? Because it could be like a booster club
Sure.
planning for a meal that might, where you don't want to single out a specific athlete that might
Yeah.
have a different cultural preferences food wise than you.
Yeah. So I would say collaboration is key. You cannot be afraid to collaborate. And I
Yeah.
would say it's absolutely necessary. You need to collaborate. The
Mhm.
more you can include others in the journey, the better, because you can't just rely on your own knowledge. And that typically is where it goes wrong, right? If you just rely on your
Right.
own knowledge
Yeah.
and you're putting together, maybe meals for the team or whatever, or even, creating a meal plan for an individual athlete and you're just trying to do it alone and you're just trying to get it done and you're using just your
Mhm.
own thoughts and your own knowledge and your own lived experiences to
Yeah.
create something, that's where we can easily get it wrong. And that can be offensive, right? That can be
Yep.
offensive to an athlete to feel like they weren't seen or heard. But if you are including others, so you use the example of like the booster club, trying to include those parents of the kids that
Yes.
are a part of that, right? Like, and obviously, we know that takes a twofold participation. Parents have to be willing to participate and willing to
Yeah.
share their insights and willing to teach others about their culture. But sometimes it's a matter of asking the question and being invited to collaborate on
Yep.
whatever that is to that they want to be collaborated on. And I
And
would say for parents too, because I know they're a major part of this journey. If you know that you come from a specific culture and you know that your child's teammates or the people that are caring for your child are not fully aware, don't be afraid of sharing more about your culture.
yeah.
That is essential. Don't hold that back.
Yeah.
Don't feel like that's going to keep your child from being who they want to be or who you feel
Mhm.
like they should be. That's essential.
Yeah, it's so interesting in that when you just like as you were talking, I had a flashback to college basketball at TCU. Okay, so like, when we plan meals, we're always like carbon protein, carbon protein. We need chicken or beef with our rice at the pregame meal. And I can see the athlete, can't remember his name, but he was a male basketball player from I hate that I can't, it's been so long. I can't remember what country, but like where he came from, like he ate a version of what I would call fried rice, a version of that for a pregame meal. No protein. And I'm talking about like a 7 foot tall basketball player. And so for as
Yes.
long as I had him, on the pregame menu, I was like, I need a chafing dish of
Yep.
this fried rice made this way. And they're like, what? I'm like, no, I need one whole chafing dish for this athlete because that's
Yeah.
all he was eating because that was what was familiar to him. And he grew up eating that before he played basketball. So
Yes.
here, and so it's really, I think, trying to dial in on those things and what can you add or what could be, can we potluck this if it's a booster
Right.
club? And then two, I think, like, talk to me a little bit on your thoughts on if there are a few people on a team that are of a different culture, a different ethnicity, the importance of getting the team involved and maybe having the team, maybe not like on a game day, but experiencing a different food, learning a little bit about their teammates' culture. How would you recommend that maybe either coaches or parents try to like foster that type, like between team, teammates to learn more? So it's not always like, oh, we're singling out and doing something special for this person. How about we're all trying to learn together, and potentially try new foods. Good learning experience for young athletes for sure. It's Brandon.
Okay, I love that question, honestly, because I do feel that we have a responsibility to not only expose others to different cultures, but also to help others to understand there is not always superiority when we think
Right.
about, different types of foods. Sometimes, we think about mainstream media, you might have a certain culture, and I actually have two thoughts on this, where they may have been taught that their food is unhealthy, 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 right? And
Yeah.
so, if you're growing up in a household where you're watching on the news that this particular culture's food is unhealthy, you might look at it and say, I don't want to try that. I heard that it was unhealthy or whatever. So we have, an obligation to expose our athletes to different things and help them to understand the true value of nutritious foods, regardless of what
Yeah.
cultural background they come from. Understanding, hey, this food looks different. It's a plantain. Have you heard of a plantain?
Yeah.
Do you know how we can use that, in performance,
Yep.
right? And educating them on that and helping them to understand it's still a healthy food. Just because it looks different and you
Yep.
didn't grow up eating it doesn't make it any less valuable. So we
Yes.
do have that responsibility. I think that's such a great idea too, to expose kids. And I think that also helps with parents that are from those different cultural backgrounds to understand you don't have to stop serving your kids certain foods because you think it's unhealthy and it won't help their
Right.
performance, right? Like there's
Right.
that misconception of, oh man,
Yeah.
he can't eat that, and this my food is so unhealthy, right? But they might lack the education and understanding and knowing, wait, some of
Hmm.
these foods we can work with, right?
Yep.
There's lots we can do with this. Let's collaborate, right? Like let's bring you in. Maybe you can help teach the kids how to cook some of
Yeah,
these foods. Maybe
exactly.
we
I
can
love that.
provide tips, so just kind of that back and forth. Again, collaboration. It's we
Mhm.
circle back to collaboration every single time because I feel like that's so important, but you really should loop in everybody in the journey.
Yep, I love that. And when we think about like kids, I say kids, I mean teens or whatnot, they're so kind of these days, especially locked into their own world and what they always do and doing it that way. Like I think there is great opportunity for expansion. I know like I grew up in a pretty like, there we didn't wasn't a ton of diverse culture where I grew up and tried to expose myself to it. Sometimes in sports, automatic got thrown into it. So I quickly learned and asking questions. But like one of the best experiences I personally ever had was when I got contracted to go to the Middle East and teach dietitians sports nutrition. And I learned very quickly like sports nutrition to me is not sports nutrition to them. And we are not eating peanut butter and jelly at halftime. We're talking
Yes.
about like hummus and pita bread and fattoush and all these different things. That's what they're eating before they go to, a workout or whatever that is. And the first time I ever went, I went to Lebanon and I just went in with the idea of like, you know what? I'm going into a world that I'm not used to. This is their world, and I'm going to enter it. And I just want to see what it's all about. And when I did that with that attitude, I had the most amazing time. I ate foods. I don't know what they were, how they were prepared, very different than what maybe I had had. But the one thing that stands out to me is I would teach whole day workshops. And so there would be lunch in the middle. And the women in my trainings, they would be so eager and excited for me to try one of the foods. They would be like, you have to try this and the flavor and this. And so I think that there's a lot, like you're saying, that can be done with sharing. And maybe that's even like a team building. Like I could see that like almost like a potluck for the team where it's a team building and everyone's bringing something from their culture. And I mean, not just to like include everyone, but to really just expand your own horizons, both parents and athletes. Because ultimately, to me, that makes you a more well-rounded individual. But I think we need to propose the cultural team potluck.
Yes, I love that, honestly. And you know what? Something I used to do. I actually went to high school and I grew up in a predominantly white area.
Mhm.
And so it was always interesting with my basketball team in high school. Everybody always had a team dinner each week at one of our homes, right? Whether
Ah,
it
yeah,
was if somebody on our team, we would host dinner there. And every time we would have dinner at our house, my grandma would cook. It was just all love. And we actually did that even when we were in college.
yeah,
The whole team, we were traveling through Texas, we stopped at home, Granny cooked. Like it was one of those things
yeah.
where, people could experience something different and
Mhm.
realize that different isn't always bad,
Agree.
right? Like
Yes.
different can still feel good. It might feel unfamiliar,
Yeah.
but it can still feel good. And so I think that is so important. And that doesn't just hit when we're talking about food. Now we're talking about understanding and seeing other people that look different than you, have
Mhm.
different experiences than you, seeing them as another human being and
Yep.
not judging them because it's different. So I propose the potlucks too. I
I
love
love
that
it.
idea.
I think that's like such a great way to learn and get and truly experience something new. And most teenagers could afford to be taken out of their daily routine and their normal everyday
Okay,
and exposed. I
exactly.
mean, that's really what expands, I think, your horizons and just you as an individual to other people's cultures. And I would encourage, I think we talked about the coaches and athletic trainers and strength coaches that might be taking on roles like not only are they not dietitians, but sometimes they're forced to be in roles where they have to plan the food, they're trying to manage what they're doing and manage different
Yes.
things with different cultures and ethnicities and preferences could be another way. Any recommendations for just how to have those conversations, even like I think nowadays interprofessional collaboration is such a huge thing. Dietitians and coaches and strength coaches and having that conversation. I mean, just kind of thinking through what, like, even if it's those people talking together to try, maybe they have a player or two players or three that are of a different culture than all of them. Like, what would you recommend to those coaches and things, even just like ways that they can further educate themselves so that they can better communicate with their teams? Yeah, planning meals, but really just in general. You have a lot of knowledge in just general overall cultural competence and communications. So what do you think kind of in that space?
Yeah. So when it comes to finding, in my mind, I think finding the right resources,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
There's so many different routes that you can go. It can be finding a human resource. So this would be reaching out to a dietitian that maybe looks a little bit different than you or has different
Mhm.
experiences than you, or somebody who's a veteran in the field. So when I think about you, Amy, like being able to connect with somebody like you who has been in all those different spaces and
Mhm.
pulling knowledge from you can be very helpful. In an athletic trainer or a strength and conditioning coach can leverage that knowledge and those experiences
Yeah.
you've had, right? So having someone who's, been in the trenches, has experienced that before, can always be a resource. Also, looking through different resources that can help educate you on those cultures, right? So there's nothing wrong with a quick Google search, right? And figuring out more about like
I've
a
done it.
culture.
I've done it. Yeah. 100%.
Like there are so many things you can do if you have an athlete that brings up something. So let's say you're in the athletic training room, maybe you're taping ankles or you're stretching somebody or whatever you're doing, and you have an athlete that's like, man, I had this for breakfast this morning, it was so good, mom made it. And in your mind you're like, what is that? I have no idea what that is. Go do a quick Google search.
Yeah.
That's okay, because
Yeah.
you want to be able to create rapport. You heard that. Now you do your due diligence, you go find out more about it. And
Yeah.
now you can talk to your athlete about that and say,
Yep.
hey, last week you told me about, A, B, or C. I looked it up because I wasn't familiar with it.
Yeah.
And listen, I'm planning to have it this week in my meals. So I'm trusting you that you gave me a good recommendation. Like
So
things
good.
like that make your
Yep.
athlete feel so good. So, doing your due diligence, nothing wrong with a quick Google search, nothing wrong with connecting with a human being that's had those experiences. And then I would say different platforms that host information, like,
Yeah.
Amy, I know you've got a lot of resource in that. We've done some cultural competency stuff
Mhm.
in there, some of your courses and books and all the things. And then you've got other platforms too, like GSSI has a really good platform as well. There's menu planning, like there's
Yeah.
different things that you can tap into for resources so that you're not alone and doing it alone. Like I
Yeah.
said, collaboration is key. So find those experts in that area and tap in with them.
Love that. Two sub questions to what you just said that I thought of as you were talking. First one is So you mentioned using a human resource, not human resources, but human resource. So for example, what is the best way, would you say, to communicate? Let's say that I'm this and I have an athlete and I know a strength coach or an athletic trainer that is of the same ethnicity or culture as that athlete. And I think one of the best ways would be trying to learn from somebody else. Is it appropriate to go talk to that person, that strength coach or the athletic trainer and be like, hey, like I have an athlete just saying, that's like, how do you have that conversation? I guess is what I'm saying, because you're doing it with a good heart because you want to try to learn and you're hoping that the other professional can inform you. But kind of back to that, like offending, not offending. I mean, I find, like you said, people would love to talk about their culture, but you know what I mean? That open door of communication. What would you say is the best way to go about that for people that might be a little timid or insecure about like not wanting to offend somebody?
Yeah, I would say find a level of connection that doesn't have to do with their skin color,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So when you say, hey, you know what? You're black, he's black. How do we, versus, hey, you know what? You're from Kentucky. I know that so and so is from Kentucky as well. And
Mhm.
I've heard you guys talk about some of the same foods. Can you give me some more insight on that? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Love that.
hey, you know what? You mentioned you're Tongan and so is Tongan. Can you give me some more insight on the culture? Right. So
Yeah.
we're going beyond what they look like on the outside and we're using things that they've identified with to be
Yeah.
able to create connection and really connect the dots. So I would
Love
say
that.
that will go over way better
Yeah.
than saying,
Then.
hey, y'all kind of look the same. Like that probably won't go over too well.
Because sometimes like the people that are from they can be such a good resource. And so but I know, and everyone is different obviously, but just thinking how you open up that conversation. So I love that recommendation. And then my other comment, whatever you want to say, is like I know for myself being in, because I've been in a lot of experiences that have just been like, how did I get myself here? Okay, great. And so sometimes I'm just, especially I was able to do this, I feel like really with male athletes, it was a little bit easier, but like just straight up real. And I'm like, listen, I haven't ever, worked with an athlete in, of your cultural background. And I really want to understand. And I am just being totally honest that I don't know, but I want to know. Like, is that appropriate? Because I've done that before, like I said, sometimes with males, but I'm like, just tell me a little bit about it. And I have found in the situations that it's always gone over well. And just being like totally honest, sometimes I feel like that's better than trying to act like you know and not knowing.
Yes,
Because
100%.
that's,
And yes, admitting lack of knowledge is way better at
yeah,
any point in time
yeah.
than acting as though you know, and then them finding out that you have absolutely no idea, right? And they will quickly find out. They will quickly find, and that's the thing about athletes. I feel that makes them so unique.
Yeah.
They're very good at spotting true from fake when it comes to
Mhm.
people, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not always sports nutrition science and
Yes,
stuff like that,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
trends. But when it comes to judging people and authenticity, athletes have a knack for it.
Yeah.
So anytime you present yourself as something that you are not, or your knowledge
Right.
as something that you are not, it never goes over well with
Yeah.
athletes and they will quickly find out. So I definitely lean on admitting lack of knowledge in that
Yeah.
area and showing that you're willing to learn.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say, I don't know and I'm not willing to learn, than it is to say, I don't know, but I am willing to learn and I
Yeah.
want to learn.
Yeah.
That goes over really well. And I would say, the other thing that comes to mind is pretending to know something just because you've had one experience, saying, okay, I am going to, generalize this across the board because I had this one
Mhm.
experience with one person. That's
Right.
another thing that
Yeah.
can go over really badly as well. So, honestly, taking it as in a case by case basis and taking each individual athlete, if you can. I
Yeah.
know that's hard,
Yeah.
especially when you've got 100 some odd athletes.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to provide individual care or even have those individual connections all the time. But if you can see them as an individual, see what areas you can apply based off of your previous experiences, if you have them, and then go
Mhm.
from there. Still continue to ask the questions,
Yeah.
still continue to ask them who they are and give them an opportunity to share a little bit more about them so you can apply that knowledge. And then you can add it to your knowledge bank.
Yeah.
At that point, now it's knowledge that you have that you can apply in other instances if it fits.
Yeah. One thing that kind of came to mind when you were talking, and then we can kind of start to close out, but I was thinking about, especially to those of you that do plan meals, or if you're a parent in charge of a team or whatever, like we always want nutrition to be at the top of the list. But I have learned some days just throw nutrition out the window and I mean, like maybe not on a pregame meal before a massive competition, but like on a Friday lunch, like at the Cowboys, you throw it out the window. And I used to tell Coach Garrett, Coach Garrett, most days we eat for nutrition, some days we eat for morale.
Yes.
And I mean, like, and in the NFL, having lots of players that, they come from an African American culture and they love Southern food. And I had a chef that would like home make hush puppies and like make his own batter on catfish. And we'd
Oh
fry it
my
outside,
gosh. So
outside the
good.
thing. And they were like, "Are you serving fried catfish?" I'm like, "Listen, it's a Friday at noon. They're not playing until Sunday. It's all going to
Yep.
be okay." And the players loved it because
Yes.
he brought in someone that knew how to really make it similar to like how they grew up eating. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, like we do nutrition the majority of the time, and we are incorporating fruit. We have collard greens, we've got cornbread,
Yep.
I got salad,
Yep.
and so I have found that sometimes that is the best way to go because in a team environment, it can build so much morale and players will get other players in on their food. You know what I mean? And so on foods that might be more familiar to them. And I watched that with my own eyes and like how much that could do for a team and for players on a team that maybe were not normally eating what they would typically call normal to them. And it was just really cool to see what that looked like and how that could actually bring a team together.
I love that because I can literally vision in my head, maybe an athlete being like bonding with a teammate and saying, I mean, you've never had a hush puppy like this before.
Yeah.
Let me put you on, like just try it. Let me know what you think. And then having
Mhm.
that athlete that maybe hadn't been exposed to that before, try something and be delighted in the flavor
Yeah.
and be delighted in the
Yeah.
taste and say,
It's fun.
oh my gosh, I've missed out. So that's always an enjoyable thing to see. And that, I
Yeah.
mean, it creates a bonding experience,
Yeah,
honestly,
totally.
showing others, hey, we're human, you're human. We're in this together. You're trying
Yeah.
something I
Love that.
love, and I love that you love it. So
Yeah.
it just creates more connection.
Yep, love that. Okay, closing out, final question. So, what about like how does an athlete of a different culture that might be in a team, a sport, have maybe coaches that are totally different culture than theirs? Like, so they're the one out of maybe a whole team or a whole environment. How would you recommend that they respectfully, but also of integrity to themselves, like that they really advocate for themselves in that setting? Because that can be hard because you might feel like you're
Yeah.
being singled out. Even if you're
Yeah,
not, you might feel like that. And so, how would you
for sure.
recommend they advocate for themselves?
Yeah, honestly, it comes with being open and communicating. It can be
Mhm.
very easy to kind of clam up in situations like
Yeah.
that where you don't want to say that something maybe is offending you, or you don't want to say, hey, you know what, we've had the same American style meal over and over and over again, and
Yeah.
I'm not from here, I don't want to eat this, right? But
Yeah.
how many athletes do we know that have gone weeks without saying anything
Yeah.
because they were afraid to speak out? So
Yeah.
I will say, don't be afraid to be honest. Find someone
Mhm.
that you trust and communicate to them whatever it is that you want. If you want the
Yeah.
team to create a meal that is familiar to you, dude,
Mhm.
say that, right? If
Yeah.
you feel overwhelmed with the team putting together potluck and having you be a part of it, if it's overwhelming to you, say that. Say, hey, you know what? I'd rather us not do something like this, but also be ready to
Yeah.
provide, some thoughts on what you want to do different,
Mhm.
right? It's
Yeah.
the responsibility can't always be on the people that are trying to accommodate. Sometimes that responsibility also has to be on you as that person who might be coming from a different cultural background to communicate and be honest and be open.
Yeah.
Don't clam up. That's all I can say. Don't clam up. It can feel weird. It can feel different. But in order for you to feel good in the atmosphere that you're in, you have to communicate. And when you communicate, everyone can learn and everything starts to feel a little bit better and more comfortable.
Love that. Love that. Okay, you are awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing insights. I just think we can all learn on all fronts. We all are we all come from one culture, one ethnicity, and there's a whole lot of them out there
Mm-hmm, yeah.
that we can learn from and choose to really be open. So, I appreciate it so much. Tell people where they can find all of your stuff and we'll also drop it in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, thanks for having me. And if you're trying to find us, you can go to stephandbri.com, STEFANDBRI.com. And then if you're on Instagram, you can follow me at the Athletician. I won't spell it out. I know it's a lot. So if you drop it here in the links, you'll be able to
We
find me
will
on
drop it.
Instagram as well.
And side note, just type in Brianna Butler and it will also pop up. In case you can't spell that, there's a lot of T's and I's in there. So, yeah, but we'll drop it in the show notes. Bree, you're the best. Thank you so much for coming on.